Hello again. All right, so this is the second half of the conservation biology lectures. And in this lecture, we're going to focus on some of the conservation efforts that are ongoing in not only the US, but in California, and more specifically, locally in places like Riverside and San Bernardino County, possibly Orange County. And we'll highlight also some non government agencies or organizations, NGOs, that are putting out their efforts to help conserve not only ecosystems, but also the biodiversity contained within those ecosystems to the benefit of us humans, right? So we'll end with a brief outline of all the ways in which human populations can benefit from efforts in conservation biology. All right, so in conservation biology, the goal is to one, understand what biodiversity we have, how that biological diversity interacts not only with the non-living environment, right, abiotic environment, um, the land, the soil, the sort of nutrients that may or may not be contained in the soil, the weather, right, availability of water, right, but also how that biodiversity interacts with itself. You know, how is it that one organism is influenced by another, right? At this point, we would understand things like food webs and such. And in understanding the local biodiversity, we can then begin to explore ways to reduce the biodiversity or reduce the loss of that biodiversity. And that can be a challenge because this is a dynamic science field where there's a lot to be learned still as we encounter one particular species that we're trying to preserve. We might learn that there's not a whole lot of research or experience, anecdotal experience, on how to counter the loss of a particular species. And so, investing efforts, a wide variety of strategies can help us um, learn in the moment what works, what doesn't work, in countering the loss of biodiversity. And we can focus on protecting a population. We can also focus on restoring the numbers of an endangered population. Uh, but oftentimes we are invested in outlining what are the threats that are created by us humans and specifically our activities that lead to um, harm to biodiversity. So let's look at broadly and then scale down. In the U.S., we have a very good example of efforts that led to the increasing of the population of black-footed ferrets in the U.S. From being reduced to just 18 individuals, and think about what that might mean to the genetic diversity of a very, very, very small ferret population, and um, performing some or investing in breeding strategies to help bring their numbers up. I think you might understand also included breeding them in such a way that you would increase genetic variety to the best of our ability, given the fact that there were only 18 left, right? But growing their numbers has now led to reintroduction efforts where ferrets are going back to the wild. So that's on a very large, scale looking at the U.S. overall. Um, But examples also exist in California, right, with the California condor. That's been a pretty successful breeding effort to restore the California condor population and reintroducing them back to the wild. There's also examples of the southern sea otter, um, otters that you can see um, up close, in fact, up in Monterey Bay, which we've talked about. Um, Beavers that you can see pretty close if you were to go up to the lower eastern Sierras. You can get to locations where you can find populations of beavers. Red-legged frog, that is part of the Southern California and down into Baja California. That's the uh, the range of this red-legged frog. Its numbers have declined, but we're looking to restore those. Desert tortoises, as we might find in Joshua Tree, and even more closely, the Stevens kangaroo rat that we might have here in the eastern side of Moreno Valley that poses a challenge to developers looking to create warehouses and logistics centers and are often stifled by conservation groups and their lawyers that point out that the Stevens kangaroo rat is a species that needs to be protected. And so the lands where we find those kangaroo rats are protected, and that prevents urbanization and further development for commercial use of those lands. That's happening just next door here in Moreno Valley. Um, Other examples, maybe plant examples. In Hawaii, the silver sword plant um, that was once abundant have been bred in greenhouses and then reintroduced into the wild. And it's one of like the coolest plants. Also, I should probably talk more about that plant in the evolution lectures. All right, so in Riverside County, we have non-governmental organizations like the Rivers and Lands Conservancy, like the Wildlands Conservancy, and their goals are to protect among animal species things like oak species. There's several oak species that are threatened for a variety of reasons, whether it's an insect infestation, a fungal infestation, or just a reduction of the habitats where these oaks can exist. All of those are threats to the biodiversity. Native grasses, native California grasses are also protected. We can see examples of Engelmann oaks in, um, in the Santa Rosa Plateau, down in the sort of the, what would that be, Murrieta area, as well as native grasses like these purple grasses that grow there in that Santa Rosa Plateau. And that plateau is a preserve intended to help maintain these native uh, plant species. Again, the Stephen kangaroo rat, least Bell's vireo, and the Delhi Sands flower-loving fly that you can find in Rialto. And that's the only place where you can find this fly. So conservation efforts by these non-government organizations are instrumental or have been instrumental. They, of course, do work alongside with government agencies, national forests, and so on. But their work should not be unnoticed. All right. So the landscapes include um, a variety of ecosystems next to each other, and oftentimes those ecosystems or the landscapes are fragmented as a result of our urbanization. Right, as populations grow, human populations, that is, they require um, development of land for housing, for commercial use, for transportations and agriculture, even, and so on. And as a result, we create fragments, right? So just if you can imagine this massive area being all natural, where animals can move across, up and down, sideways, laterally, all over the place. But then all of a sudden, we start urbanizing this area, and we start urbanizing over here, and so on. And as we do that, we create these fragments, right? If we have highways, right, and so on, um, we can really, really create challenges for species that are trying to move across, right? And so we create these fragmented areas. And so, not surprisingly, some conservation groups have made their way into the strategic use of public lands, where we bring this um, issue to the forefront, and we use our understanding of ecosystems and how life moves through those ecosystems to help create a plan that addresses this fragmentation and allows for species to be able to move around what used to be a big parcel of land that was uninhabited by humans, that is now becoming more and more saturated with humans. Um, so here's a visual of what a landscape might look like, right? You can see that there are meadows filled with grasslands. We can see that there are also forests, and we can see aquatic um, areas as well in here. And we can see also like a very complex and convoluted riverways as well, right? So this landscape already includes a variety of ecosystems, and animals would be able to travel across all over, right? Now imagine we come in and we start urbanizing this area, cutting down forests, redirecting the flow of water to make it, more useful land for our own human needs. Well, you can see how that's going to interrupt the flow of animals through those landscapes. All right, so in the creation of urbanized areas, we create artificial edges, right? And those edges have unique features. And some species tend to thrive in those edges, and that's good for them. But it could be that they're thriving to the detriment of others. So just as we thrive as humans to the detriment of other species, some species can thrive as a result of what we do. And then that exacerbates the challenges to other species that are now threatened by both our activities and the activities of those species that might benefit from what we do. So again, to try and mitigate some of the challenges we create in destroying habitats, we have implemented what we call movement corridors that can connect those isolated habitats in such a way that we can help reduce the effect of fragmenting populations and lands or spaces. Um, Here's some examples of what I mean about species that might benefit from edges we create, right? I mean, they seem to be already adapted to natural edges, but when we create them, we're just creating more opportunities for them. This is the brown-headed cowbird, uh, a type of bird that you might find, perched on a cow. And they are social parasites, and what they do is the females will lay eggs in the nests of a different species. If the cowbird offspring, if they're hatchlings, are born first, those hatchlings tend to kick out the eggs of the uh, the the other bird species that created the nest to begin with. So, as you might have learned in population ecology, one way to really significantly reduce the population of any species is to basically target babies and their reproductive efforts, right? So you can see how this could be a disaster to that population of birds that are being parasitized socially by the cowbird. And one of them is least Bell's vireo in our particular area. And when I say our particular area, I mean past Beaumont, past, what is it? What is that? Those outlets out there? Anyway, I can't think of their names right now. It'll come to me after I've recorded the presentation, probably. But there's a whitewater preserve that connects the San Bernardino Mountains to San Jacinto's, and you can find the least Bell's vireo there. And if this brown-headed cowbird continues socially parasitizing their nests, and leading that may lead to the loss of their the vireo's own eggs, then the vireo population is going to decline as the cowbird population increases, and that's going to be a reduction of biodiversity, right, and species richness as well. Examples of biocorridors, right, include, maybe as a surprise to you, Cajalco. That little expressway there is an actual corridor. It was intentionally made wider to increase the odds of successful crossings by things like mountain lions, bobcats, coyotes, right? If they're made narrow and cars are driving by them, then it just increases the odds of potentially hitting one of them as they're crossing. But if they're wider, then it makes it more comfortable, easier passage for them. And there's also underpasses in that corridor for safe travel across that Cajalco. In Beaumont, there's also biological corridors that connect the San Gorgonio area and the Badlands down below to San Jacinto Wildlife Area, an area that we maybe some have already visited or we will be visiting ourselves as part of the course. All right, and as we wrap up, we also establish protected areas. Some of these conservation groups buy land and try to restore it back to its wild form, try to clean it up, try to slow down the loss of plant species that serve as maybe nesting sites, maybe food sources, maybe shelter to other species, and therefore they increase biodiversity. So they would be good examples of keystone species that maintain high biodiversity. So things like our national parks. Closest one to us would be Joshua National Park, Joshua Tree National Park. That's an excellent park we ought to visit. And we also have state parks, and those state parks would have also some sort of policies, maybe even like local laws to help maintain the biodiversity. So they will have, basically some sort of regulations that prevent people from doing certain things, activities that can reduce or threaten the biodiversity there. Anyway, so in those parks, we apply our understanding of population ecology, how our population is responding to biotic and abiotic factors, living things and non-living things, how energy flows through those particular organisms, from plants to herbivores to carnivores and so on and so forth, right, including parasites and decomposers. And then the landscape dynamics, right? What kind of landscapes or what kind of ecosystems do we have within that park, perhaps, um, that are interacting with each other, and how can we um, support um, the the flow of life through those ecosystems in that landscape. Um, so once we understand population ecology and ecosystems, we can use those ecological principles to then implement some sort of restoration effort. And when we do that, that's restoration ecology. And that could mean detoxifying pollutants um, in that area, right? That could mean, for example, a pollutant could be just salts, just a high concentration of salts. The Salton Sea, for example, um, that's out in the Coachella area, past that into tiny towns like Mecca and so on. The Salton Sea is a challenge because um, as water evaporates away, it's leaving behind increasingly more salty water that is threatening the fish population there. And also, the Salton Sea serves as part of the freeway fly zone, the Pacific fly zone of birds that are migrating across this area. The wetlands, the San Jacinto wetlands next door, are another example, and even Lake Paris is an example of that flyway zone. But as you get towards the Salton Sea, uh, it becomes increasingly harder to find bodies of water for these birds, and the Salton Sea is salty, and so that threatens um, or challenges them in a greater way to make their migration um, across this area. So cleaning up or restoring the Salton Sea to be less salty, to increase the fish population that would benefit migrating birds and so on, that are not only drinking the water but potentially eating fish, um, would be an example here. Replanting native vegetation, that's happening down in La Cienega Canyon. That's in Calimesa, just next door to Beaumont, between Beaumont and Moreno Valley is Calimesa. Um, and we would have visited that area, or we will be visiting that area. And we're trying to restore acorns to grow into, not restore acorns, but restore the um, coast live oak by collecting acorns, germinating them, and replanting them to try and counter the loss attributed to a particular fungus that's killing that oak. And the oak is a massive tree that provides food, shelter, nesting sites, shade for lower growing vegetation. It's an example of a keystone species. So losing that oak would be a disaster to the biodiversity there, huge loss. Um, and we're also potentially going to see the replanting of native vegetation in those Rialto sand dunes to the benefit of not only the plants themselves, but also to that particular fly species that is only found there in the world. And lastly, there's the returning of waterways to their natural course. Um, there's examples of that we can see in the U.S. And we might also bring up the Salton Sea again here. All right, so some of these large restoration projects can be seen in, for example, the Kissimmee River Restoration Project in Florida. So here's a visual of what that river uh, might have done before and how water flow was redirected um, by the creation of channels and so on, right? You can see an image of what it should have looked like. And so what's worth pointing out here, or what's important to pointing out, is that, rather than creating a river that was direct this way for our benefit, allowing it to meander like it does creates basically more opportunities. You might be thinking high surface area to volume ratios sort of stuff happening here. Look at all the benefit to so much plant community. But if you just had it directing in one linear way, it would only be a benefit to the plants right here, proximal to that river or channel. But by allowing it to meander around the way it does, it slows water flow. It allows it to essentially enter, right, farther areas of land to the benefit of those plants. So that's an example of the restoration efforts to water flow. We have the Santa Ana River that crosses through Riverside County. That's a big deal also. All right, so here's a list, and it's a short list, by the way, of local restoration efforts, just so that we have something that we can really apply to our neighborhoods, right, our communities. So I mentioned the Rivers and Lands Conservancy and the La Cienega Canyon Preserve that's in that Calamesa area just before Beaumont off the 60 and next door to Moreno Valley. And they're doing restoration work there. They're also doing restoration work in Rialto, right? And they have a variety of other lands that they're protecting as well for a variety of reasons. You can read here the good work that they're doing. But those two are close and of interest to us in our courses. Next would be the Wildlands Conservancy, and they're even larger. They extend to Northern California down to the coast. They have a variety of preserves, many of which are free. I think most that I've looked at, and I don't know that I've looked at all of them, but they're all free to the public. They're heavily invested in creating opportunities for people to connect with nature and find the value in their connections to nature. One example would be the Whitewater Preserve that is past the. I still can't remember the name of those outlets out there. You're thinking of it and you're like frustrated that I can't come up with it. But there's, yeah, those off the 10 freeway past Beaumont. It's at the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember. Anyway, there's a Whitewater Preserve there. And their goal is to restore that land back to its natural form to the benefit of the southwestern willow flycatcher and least Bell's vireo that we've talked about earlier was being socially parasitized by that brown-headed cowbird. And it's also an important biocorridor that connects the San Bernardino and the San Jacinto mountain ranges. So that's important to mountain lions, right? Bobcats, coyotes. Occasionally, a black bear, will leave the San Bernardino Mountains, cross, and then get into the San Jacinto Mountains. Interestingly, because the bear would be by itself, it gets picked up and then returned back. So the biocorridor isn't necessarily for everyone, right? But bears in this case take advantage of it. There's also the Oakland Preserve that we'll be visiting that is invested in preventing further damage to a species of oak out there that's being threatened by a gold-spotted oak borer. So they're trying to restore those oaks. And then there's also Bluff Lake Reserve, where we're reintroducing native species like the Southern California mountain yellow-legged frogs. That reserve is currently closed as those efforts are ongoing. But you would find the Bluff Lake Reserve in the San Marino Mountains, somewhere in the vicinity of Big Bear. All right, so ultimately, understanding the interaction of life within ecosystems is important in informing us about how to sustain those efforts, right? So it's about sustainability ultimately, right? So our understanding of ecosystems can help us understand how to conserve, right? So ecosystems can lead to conservation efforts. Conservation efforts can then inform us about sustainability of those efforts. And again, the ultimate goal is to help improve not just the wildlife, but also our human condition while invested in those conservation efforts ourselves. So, how is it that we benefit from those conservation efforts, and how do we benefit in sustaining them? Well, we learned earlier that uh, by conserving ecosystems, there are some services that we benefit from, right? Like fresh drinking water, like in the example of New York State, uh, or in the conservation of plant communities that can potentially be future sources of therapies for us. You know, we know about the periwinkle and the neem tree of India. Um, it also helps us with the potential preservation of our crops. Maintaining wild wheat can be a source of genes to help prevent the challenges created by inbreeding our crops to the extent that they lose genetic diversity and become vulnerable to pathogens. Um, so, having a wild relative can help us seek out um, genes that help us diversify our crops in such a way that we protect them. Um, so those are examples of resources to us, right? But also consider what happens if we reduce the loss of oak trees, pine trees, right? Um, by losing them, that means that they die. And when they die, they of course become fuel for potential fires. So, in reducing the loss of them, in breaking down dead trees, mulching them, and so on, um, we reduce fire potentials, which reduces pollution, which by smoke and so on. Um, and so there's a variety of ways in which investing in conservation leads to informing us about, sustaining these practices for our benefits. And finally, I will add that there's also the value of aesthetics, having a place to go to where you can decompress from the stressors of a highly urbanized environment that is fast moving, a place where we can um, walk and spend time in that reduces our stress, improves our mental health, our mental welfare, is wonderful. And also, I might throw in also the benefits to maintaining cultures, right? We have a rich indigenous Native American culture in a variety of forms, Cahuilla, Luiseños, that thrived in our areas at some point, made use of the lands, um, their flora and fauna, and still do today. And so maintaining our understanding, preserving their cultures to our benefit is also another value to our sustainability efforts. So in closing, we are in fact most likely um, going to save the things that we appreciate. And we appreciate the things that we understand. And so with that, um, I urge you to pursue growing your knowledge of life, biology, and invest some of your efforts, however you see fit, however you can. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be a little thing. It could just be um, volunteering your time an hour or two in the summer to go and water young oak trees that have sprouted from acorns that have been harvested in La Cienega, or simply telling people about these wonderful places that draws them in and creates more knowledge within our community of these valuable spaces. Tell them about the San Jacinto Wildlife Area. Tell them about the Santa Rosa Plateau. Tell them about all of these preserves created by Rivers and Lands Conservancy groups, the Wildlands Conservancy groups. Just informing people is already valuable effort in the sustainability of um, all of these wonderful biological places and the life contained within. Okay, we'll end the conversation here.